Hi guys, Rick with Let's Level Up, and today we're going to be looking at a new Kickstarter project called Warring Kingdom. Now, Warring Kingdom is designed by a man named Harry Gao, and is essentially a deck building game, much like Dominion, but with a much more offensive twist to it. In this game, we're not playing for victory points. We're actually trying to take another one of the players' castles. This game is going to play 2 to 4 players, and it actually incorporates a very nice kingdom building mechanic that allows you to really think about and balance out both economy and military management in order for you to obtain victory. If you try to stray heavily one way or the other, you're not going to have either the economy to sustain your army, or the army to help defend yourself. So this game is a balancing act, and it actually incorporates a really nice, neat attack mechanic involving some dice that I think you guys will enjoy. So follow us after the jump. We're going to take a look and show you a little bit of how to play Warring Kingdom, and then give you our final thoughts. Okay, so when we talk about Warring Kingdom, we're essentially referring to it as a deck building game. And at its core it is. It does break the mold a little bit, which I'm really excited about. I love it when game designers like Harry can take a proven concept, like a deck building game, and make it their own. Excuse me, and that's what I think he's done here with Warring Kingdom. Now, like deck building games, there's going to be a central supply which all players will use to purchase things with. Unlike most deck building games, I'm actually responsible for managing my kingdom. I have to protect my castle at all costs. As soon as a player destroys another person's castle, they immediately win the game. So in a multiplayer game, i.e. against more than one adversary, I'm going to have to really be cautious and make sure that the opponent on my right isn't going to kill the opponent on my left before I get the chance to. There's going to be a lot of different table politics going on, which I think will make for a very exciting game. Now, just the general lay of the land goes. I'm going to have my starting deck, which is going to be represented of 5 copper, 5 beggars, and 5 towns guard. Now, this is going to represent a 15-card deck, which I'm going to start out with. None of these cards is going to win you the game. However, it's a good starting point for you to actually utilize some of the actions on the cards to gain warriors and maybe even some of the additional advanced cards like weapons and magical rings, or the priest, or some things that are going to help bolster your kingdom up. Each player is going to have a reference card as well, which will give you the 6 phases of the turn, and they will receive a castle, of course. Now that aside, I'm also going to have a discard pile goes. So essentially, I'm going to draw 5 cards up at the start of my turn, and then I'm going to use those cards in an order depending on what the phase is. Now, I'm going to have a board in front of my setup. So in front of my deck, my castle, and my discard pile, I'm going to have 2 rows of 5 cards where I can actually deploy units to. Now, each row is going to, right now, is represented by one of these dice. So I have the first column, second column, third column, fourth column, and fifth column, and then there is a front and a back row to that. Now, depending on the type of creature or type of unit you have, some units can only attack when they're in the front row. Other units, like archers and catapults, can actually utilize attacks from the back row. When I'm doing an attack, I'm usually going to attack my front row versus your front row, unless you're out of defenses. So that makes things really interesting. Another thing, which we'll get into the attacking part later in this game, is actually depends on my die roll. So on my attack, I'll take 6 dice and I'll roll it. And depending on the numbers that I get is the position in which I'm going to actually attack. So in this case, my units that are in slots 3, 4, and 5 are each going to attack twice because that's what I rolled. It's going to make for a very interesting way to kind of keep the game balanced, adding a little bit of that luck factor that some novice players really need in order to get into the game. Overall, I really like this mechanic and the way the attack is. It's going to it really is going to kind of set Warring Kingdom apart from the other deck building games out there, It has a little bit of chance, but overall it gives you a lot more opportunity for that direct player interaction that deck building games are just missing. I think when you're collecting victory points in some games, it's generally a lot less about am I better than you, or did I just block you from getting the right move, which I don't necessarily like a lot of the times. This adds a tangible goal that really puts a new element of strategy into play. So Harry, kudos to that. So let's go over some of the basic cards really quick. I have my basic currency cards, which is going to be a copper, which is worth 1, of course, silver, which is worth 2, and finally the gold, which is worth 3. Now the castle is going to provide me 3 coins every turn. It's also going to provide me a hand of 5 cards and give me 1 action. Now, depending on what I do with the rest of that, or rather what I can do with the rest of that, depends on what action I play during my turn and what I have deployed out in the field. Excuse me, guys, I have a bit of a cold, so my voice sounds a little weird today, and I apologize for that. But, you know, I wanted to get this video out because I've been holding it for about a week now, and it's really been driving me nuts. I haven't got it out to you guys yet. And since it is a Kickstarter project, the faster you guys know about this thing, the quicker we can get this game funded. And I really think it's one we should look at overall because it's fun. And at the end of the day, we want to play fun games. So the other row here is going to be our basic units. There's the Beggar, the Town Guard, and the Warrior. Now the Beggar and the Town Guard are going to be really lighter cards. The Warrior is a bit stronger, and I'm going to start with 5 Beggars and 5 Town Guard in my deck. Now the Beggar has an ability called Enlist, which actually lets you discard 2 income cards and change the Beggar for a Warrior. So essentially, we're going to enlist this Beggar, put a little money into him, give him some training and some equipment, and he's going to become a Warrior. Now the Town Guard has a really cool ability called Brawl. So essentially, I'm going to discard 2 of my cards. 2 of my units. The Town Guard is going to become a Beggar, and then the other, excuse me, and then we can flip over the Mercenary deck, which is going to be our second deck over here, and draw the card with the, I believe, the lowest value to it. So all in all, it's a pretty interesting mechanic. The Warrior is going to be a bit starting unit, but it's going to allow us to attack. We can't attack unless we have at least 1 soldier in our row. So without the soldier, we can never even declare an attack. So the Warrior is a really cheap soldier that we can get without much grief. Now let's talk about these 4 decks over to my right. These are going to represent traveling merchants. The first is going to be a civilian merchant, which actually has more advanced cards like the Beggar and Town Guard. Things like a spy or a thief or a priest or a farmer. Generally, civilians are going to help us bolster our economy, or maybe something like the trader card that will actually hinder our opponent. So things like the thief, trader, and spy allow us to play subversive attacks against the enemy kingdoms without really having to worry about just storming down their gates. The second deck here is going to be the Mercenary deck. The Mercenary deck is actually where we can go and purchase advanced warriors like archers, veterans, and gladiators and things like that. Really powerful troops. Next up we have our weapons deck. The weapons actually are either going to be melee weapons or they're going to be ranged weapons. And depending on the unit, I can equip. So for instance, archers can get bows and distance weapons like that, whereas the warriors and the gladiators can get things like axes and spears and get more of the melee weapons. And finally, we have an equipment deck. The equipment deck, we're going to be able to get things like codexes that are actually going to be able to enhance our board's abilities. Things like armor and shields to give our units a toughness value that's higher than their already own. And generally just buff up our troops. So what I want to do now is kind of show you what a sample playthrough would look like. I'm going to take my deck, I'm going to shuffle it a few times, deal 5 cards to myself, and then just play to see how it's going to work. So here we go. Anytime you're playing a deck building game, you're going to want to make sure you shuffle a few times. And if you don't like shuffling, you probably shouldn't be playing deck building games, honestly. there's a lot of shuffling to it, and you have to really give it a good job in order to make sure that the random value is actually kept up and you're not just loading your deck. Okay, so now that I have my hand, I'm going to be able to use I'm going to start my 5 phases of my turn. Now, I have 2 beggars, a town guard, and 2 copper. Now, I have my first ability, which is act, which is essentially use one of the keywords that are going to be on these cards. Now, I have the beggar and the town guard. Now, the town guard says Brawl's ability is to actually play 2 town guards. One of them becomes a beggar, and then the other one gets turned into, a mercenary. So that's just actually going to, I'm not going to be able to play this right now because I only have 1 town guard in my hand. So my other ability is enlist. I can actually discard 2 income cards, and then this beggar would become a warrior. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and take this guy. I'm going to discard 2 income cards, which will go here in my discard pile. And then I'm going to change this beggar, bring it back to the stack here, in exchange for a warrior card. Now the warrior card says join force. It says +2 strengths and standing next to another warrior. So the more warriors I have positioned here, the better off I'm going to be. Now the next phase is going to be the deployment phase. The deployment phase, I actually get to pick a card from my hand and deploy it into one of my 10 empty positions on my board. So I'm going to deploy the town guard in position 3 on my first row. So it looks something like that. I have my second row here highlighted by this die, and then my first row. So my next turn may look something like this, where I'll have a beggar in my second row and my town guard in my first row. You get the picture. I have 10 different slots to be able to put my cards in, which is a lot of room for us to be able to go through, maximize the different cards from this game, and produce a very big attack. Remember, I can't attack unless I have a warrior. So I won't be able to attack until I get this warrior card out onto my field in order to initiate the challenge. The next phase is the actual attack phase. So after I deploy, I can actually make the decision of whether I'm going to attack or not. I can also essentially pay 2 income cards and choose to attack again on my turn if I have the coin. Finally, the 4th phase is going to be pay. In the pay phase, I essentially will have to pay the upkeep cost for all of the cards I have here. So the upkeep cost, beggar's not actually in play. The upkeep cost for my town guard is 0, so it doesn't cost anything to have him on the field. Now I discarded 2 of my copper pieces earlier, but I still have 3 for my castle. So I can actually use my 3 and buy another town guard if I wanted to, or a couple copper pieces, or I could see the top 3 cards of one of these. So for instance, I want to see the top 3 weapons I have in my deck. And the weapons I have are the catapult and the javelin. So I got 2 copies of catapult, 1 copy of the javelin. Now the problem there is that the catapult cost 11 coin and the javelin cost 5 coin. So I'm unable to buy either one of these. So I still have 3 coin left over, but unfortunately I'm not going to be able to spend it this turn unless I want to buy something from one of these piles. The copper is 1, the silver is 4, the gold is 7, the warrior is 4, town guard is 2, and the beggar is 0. Now I don't want to flood my hand with a bunch of kind of underwhelming cards, but I would like to get the town guard into my deck. He does provide a good defensive base, and I can use his enlist, or rather brawl ability, to potentially get a cheap mercenary. So finally, the last phase is, again, the buy phase. Once I'm done with my buy phase, play will proceed to the left, and we'll keep going that way until somebody's castle is no longer standing. Now, one thing to remember here is that when I'm attacking, my units that I can attack with are actually going to be based on what I roll. So a 1 through 5 would actually indicate positions 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And depending on how many dice values I get, is how many times that attacks. So there's a potential I could attack with maybe 1 warrior card here. Let's say that he is there. And if I don't roll a 3, let's say this 3 was a 5, and I had 3 5s, a 4, a 2, and a 1 that I rolled to my attack, and I didn't roll my 3, my warrior's not actually attacking. And the defensive player here is actually going to do the same thing on their side to see what's going to deal damage that way. So they would roll, and if they had a card that was in a position they would essentially attack me, and I would take the damage. So we're going to be doing damage first with the attacking player, and then going around the table, depending on who we're attacking. So the value of 6 is actually going to be a critical hit, and this allows me to actually not only take one of your cards and put it into your discard pile, but actually kill it outright, and if I can beat their defensive value. So if I kill a card outright, rather than going to the defensive their discard pile, it'll go back to the stack here, or into the mercenary or civilian deck if it came from one of those. So very powerful. So essentially we're going to be chipping away at each other until our defenses are down, and then hit the castle. Now, I talked earlier before the jump about managing economy and military. Now there are certain units, such as the veteran, the master warrior, and the gladiator, that actually have, let's see here, let's get these in positions 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now these actually have, and the warrior even has it, they have an upkeep cost. Now if I can't pay the upkeep cost for my units, they get discarded. So it's something we really got to be careful for. If I have the gladiator out, it's not going to do us any good if I don't have the infrastructure, the farmers, or the coin in my deck in order to keep that supply up. So as soon as the supply goes, my units are going to go. So this game really adds a in-depth, what's the right word I'm looking for here? It really adds a kingdom building perspective to this that a lot of the other games like Dominion really don't focus on. Again, Dominion, I feel like, and don't get me wrong, I think Dominion's a great game, but I think Dominion focuses a little bit more about getting the shinies, the victory points, rather than providing the element of strategy. Again, it's one of those games where I can block my way to victory rather than making the right play. And I think Warring Kingdom is actually going to change that for a lot of people. It'll change their opinion. So definitely check this out. We'll be right back with our final thoughts. Well, that was a look at Warring Kingdom and how it's played. Now, I gave you kind of a 1,000-foot view on it. What I really want to talk about now are some of the pros and cons and how I see this game working. So, our final thoughts, so to speak. Now, let's talk about some of the cons first, because I think there are a couple here that I think Harry is going to address during this Kickstarter project. I also think that this game is going to be funded. I think what he has here is going to be a really good game. I'm getting off on the pros already. Cons. One thing that really struck me, and again, this is a prototype that I'm looking at, so not everything is final. I think the artwork is okay. It didn't wow me by any means. The text is a little hard to read on some of the cards. I think overall, maybe the user interface or the card layout itself could be tweaked a little bit and actually could be brightened up just a smidge to make things a little bit easier on the eyes, especially if you're playing in a darker room or not a room that's well enough lit. It's a little harder to read. Also, it involves dice. Now, I don't mind this personally, but there are a lot of players that I know that kind of check out as soon as dice become a factor, even in card games where I'm relying on a deck and there's still a random there. There's the idea of the dice. Now, I think the dice actually mechanic in this game is executed beautifully. I can only attack depending on where my orders are going, and my orders are essentially the dice. So me as a commander, I'm shouting my orders and I'm making a random roll, and depending on what I get is what happens. So it does add that element of chance into the game. I don't think it's a bad thing, but some people could take that as a negative. One other con I think I get with most deck building games is it takes you a little while to get up there, right? And I actually like the kingdom building aspect of this. However, if you get off to a really bad start in this game, or somebody happens to pull a gladiator or a veteran or one of the master warriors or something like that out of the table really early in the game, it can make a significant impact. So there may be a few balancing tweaks that Harry can make in order to fix that. But the only way we're going to know that is, again, if this game gets funded and as the playtesting and the prototyping period of this game goes on. So that being said, let's go on to the pros. The pros, it's a really fun game. It actually gives us a chance to break the mold, break a successful mold at that, and kind of expand on something we knew worked before with games like Dominion or Legendary or Ascension or those other deck building games, and actually expand and improve upon it. It adds a direct player interaction mechanic with the attacking phase, and I think, and it actually gives the defending player just as equal a chance in order to make sure that attack is not going to come through, which at the end of the day is excellent. Very well done on that, Harry, and anybody else involved in making Warring Kingdom. This was a really, really fun game. I'm glad I got the opportunity to check it out. You guys definitely should go check out the Kickstarter now. See if there's a backing level that you really think fits you, and if so, back it. I think, again, one way or another, this thing is getting backed, and you're going to want to get it. I think it's one that you need to have on your shelves. So thank you so much for watching this video. Again, if you liked it, please give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. All of our information can be found at letslevelup.net, including our social media pages like Twitter and Facebook. Check out Harry's game, Warring Kingdom, on Kickstarter now. There's just a little over 20 days left in the project as of filming this, or as the upload of this video goes. And definitely think you should give it a look. Thank you so much. Until next time, game on.